Okay, as we said, our focus is on Ottawa this morning as Mark Carney gets set to be sworn in as Canada's latest Prime Minister, the 24th, and a new cabinet is unveiled. Let's go to Ottawa now. We're joined by Ian Lee. Ian Lee is with the Sprott School of Business at Carleton University. Ian, thank you for joining us on an eventful day. It's pretty clear from the leaks that have been made to the press on cabinet composition that Carney wants to set a new tone here. I think any new prime minister would, but in the context of the lack of popularity of the Trudeau government and the context, of course, of our very fraught relationship now with our big neighbor to the south, what kind of message do you think Mark Carney wants to send today?
Yes, thank you, Paul. I agree that Carney wants to send a different message. He is, I have long argued, he is more from the blue liberal wing of the Liberal Party. Many parties have two wings or factions, and in the Liberal Party, there was the more progressive or red side of the party, led by none other than Justin Trudeau, and Mark Carney is much more in the tradition of the blue liberal wing that has a long tradition in this party going all the way back to Robert Winter, who ran against Pierre Trudeau in '68 as the business liberal. So what he's doing with this cabinet, and let's be clear, it's a symbolic cabinet. It's widely accepted and expected that Mr. Carney, Prime Minister designate, will call an election when he returns from Europe. So this cabinet's going to last for 10 to 30 days. That means they're not going to do very much. There's not very much you can do in 10 to 30 days on the job. So he was sending out a signal by removing or demoting some of the more, shall we say, controversial people. I'm thinking especially of Mr. Guilbeault, who was, red meat to people in Western Canada, and understandably so because of some of the things he said about oil and gas development and pipelines and so forth. The people he did keep are the most competent, I think, of the former cabinet, and he got rid of a lot of the rest.
Okay, we're joined by another expert guest as well. She is in Calgary, Laurie Williams, Associate Professor at the Department of Economics, Justice and Policy Studies at Mount Royal University. Laurie, thank you for joining us as well. I'll ask you the same question. What kind of message do you think Mark Carney wants to send today in his cabinet composition?
Well, it looks like he's trying to send a message of taking very seriously this moment, that this is his leadership. He is focused on the issues that are important to Canadians. We are seeing him arrive at the Governor General's residence by himself. So he's quite clearly indicating here and in his plans for going to Europe right away that he's setting a new tone and a new direction, and that it's a very serious one, and that he's trying to meet the moment that Canadians are facing. I agree that he is keeping the folks in cabinet that are really important for continuity, for competence. He's bringing in new people, both for representation across the country, but also to send a pretty clear message that this is his cabinet. It's his leadership, his direction, and I think even the movement of finance and trade ministers is quite important because he recognizes in Dominic LeBlanc somebody who is very, very able, both in terms of cross Canada relations and in relations with the United States. That's his great strength, and moving Mr. Champagne into finance, he's signaling again that he wants somebody very competent there. But of course, we know that his economic credentials mean that he's got great strength in that capacity as well.
Ian, Chrystia Freeland returns to cabinet in a lesser role. It could only be a lesser role because she was clearly the Trudeau government's most senior cabinet minister until the day that she dropped that bombshell that really has led us in many ways to today. What are your thoughts on Chrystia Freeland returning to cabinet in a reduced role? The reports are that she will be Minister of Transport, still a very significant cabinet position, but not Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister.
You're absolutely right. No shock, no surprise whatsoever. I mean, first and foremost, Chrystia Freeland was, although she's very able, she was highly identified with, she was joined at the hip with former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. She was seen as one of his most strident and strong supporters of the policies that have been widely rejected by by the new leadership, and so that and the fact that she underperformed in the leadership, she got such a small support in the leadership contest, so that he didn't have, as shall we say, as many IOUs to her. So he couldn't remove her because she is a very able and articulate and widely known, recognized brand of the Liberal Party. But I think it was inevitable. She was not going to become the Deputy Prime Minister or the Minister of Finance. She would be given another portfolio, which nonetheless is still important. And you're absolutely right. Transport is huge. I mean, it deals with the entire transportation system in this country that is so critical: rail, trucking, airlines, roads. So she still has an important position, but it is, I think it will be seen as a demotion.
Laurie, Ian has made the point just before you joined us that this is likely to be a very short-lived government. An election call is widely expected soon. What kind of things do you think Carney wants to accomplish in the very short time he's got here? His focus clearly would be on relations with the U.S.
Well, it is going to be on relations with the United States and managing those. But he's already indicated that he doesn't want to deal directly with Donald Trump unless there is sufficient respect being shown there. He's also indicated quite clearly that he wants to focus on strengthening the Canadian economy. And I think just to build our alliances with, particularly with Europe. And we know that he's headed for Europe. Right away, and that's a signal too that he wants to show solidarity with European leaders on the economic front, and also with respect to Ukraine. I think also he's trying to signal that Canada's future is going to rely on alliances, both economic and military alliances, much more strongly with other countries. And I think it also represents a recognition that Canada and these other countries are all facing similar challenges coming out of the United States, and a united front to some degree in response to that is going to be important. I also think there are opportunities here for resetting the stage, particularly with countries that we've had tense relations with, and that includes, of course, the United States, but potentially also Mexico, and it could include India and China. So there are a lot of opportunities here, and if he sort of sets the tone that he's opening the doors for different kinds of relationships, and he's setting sending a signal of where his strength, his competence, and his priorities lie. And that he's focusing primarily on Canada and what's good for Canada, with or without the United States' help. I think that's going to be a really strong message for him to send.
Ian, we can all remember the 1988 federal election campaign in which free trade with the United States was the dominant issue. And this, in a sense, the upcoming election campaign is an echo of that in the sense that our relationship with our huge southern neighbor is the dominant issue by far. However, the big difference is that in the case of free trade, the country was very polarized on whether or not we should pursue a free trade agreement with the United States or not. Now the company has in fact come together in a way that is not often seen. How might this campaign be different than the free trade campaign?
I think we're going to be surprised. I know there's a lot of rhetoric about, exiting our relationship or really downplaying our relationship with the United States. I think that Prime Minister-elect Carney, or Prime Minister Carney, is just simply has too deep an understanding of economics and business and trade. He understands that the U.S. is the world economic superpower, 29 trillion GDP, dwarfs every other nation in the world, including China and Europe, by the way. And so the idea that we're going to somehow walk away from our largest and oldest trading partner that shares a border of almost 9,000 kilometers, I think is preposterous. The fact that he put Dominique LeBlanc in that position and to focus exclusively on the trade file, I think is very important. Dom, I've followed his career. I've met him a few times in downtown Ottawa. Ottawa's a small town, in that community. He's a very, I don't think he has any enemies. He's very self-effacing. He's a very likable individual. He is not abrasive. He is not going to go down and slam the table and call Donald Trump or anyone in the American administration names, which tells me that Prime Minister-elect Carney wants to have a reset on the relationship that's going to be less loud, less obnoxious, less confrontational. That's what I think is, that's the most important appointment I took today from this cabinet change or cabinet announcement, that he is going with Dominique Leban, who is widely liked, not only in Canada across the aisle, but has very good relationships in the White House and in the Trump administration.
We are waiting. Our camera shot is on Rideau Hall, where before too long we expect Mark Carney and his cabinet, the members of his new cabinet, to enter the room for a swearing-in ceremony. I can tell you that Bloomberg News is now reporting that Canada's new finance minister will be François-Philippe Champagne. He has been industry minister prior. He has been closely aligned with Mark Carney through the Liberal leadership campaign, and Bloomberg is reporting that it will be François-Philippe Champagne as Canada's new finance minister. Laurie Williams, how does all this look to the Conservative Party? They are very much out of the spotlight right now, but they'll be back in it before too long.
Well, they're in the spotlight in many ways in that they've got to present an alternative. Up until now, the primary focus has been against Justin Trudeau, against the carbon tax, against Mark Carney, indeed. And the focus is going to have to be looking at this impressive sort of array of people, these connections, these alliances and advisors. We'll hear more about that in coming days. But with those kinds of connections, what does Pierre Poilievre have to offer that matches up to this? In other words, what kind of leader would he be? Because it, in many ways, is going to be an election about who is best situated to deal with Canada's international challenges, and of course, the primary ones coming out of the United States. So we've got great strength, as Ian has said, in Dominique Leban on the trade file, enormously competent in that capacity, better there than in finance, as I indicated earlier. But also Mr. Champagne in finance, again, a very strong minister, one of the key leaders on the U.S. file up until this point. And of course, there are connections there as well. So it will be a challenge for the Conservatives to show who they have, not just potentially within cabinet or in their caucus, or potential new candidates, but who are going to be the advisors? You know, what kind of team or council are they going to be able to generate for the sake of Canada's future? And there are lots of very good people out there that are willing to help, I think, for whoever is the prime minister after the next election. But that sense that there are people that are in government, in cabinet, and connected into the international community that can serve Canada's interests and needs in this very difficult time, that's going to be a tall order for the Conservatives.